The Napoleonic period follows after the French Revolution. And when we get to 1799 and the end of really sort of the craziness that has absorbed the French Revolution up until this point, there's sort of three big sentiments that people are experiencing throughout France. First, people are just exhausted. There has been, by 1799, there has been 10 years of intermittent but sometimes excruciating internal conflict. On the foreign perspective, right, there's been years of battles between the different coalitions against the French, right? Whether that's the first coalition where you have Austria and Prussia against France, then they had the British. But also there's the third position, let's say, is really an underlying feeling of, let's get back to a monarchy. We've had this crazy Republican experience, and let's return in a conservative bent. And all three of those conflicting, or all three of those opinions are not, they're not mutually exclusive. So you can be sort of exhausted of the internal conflict, but sort of still looking to fight outside. There are some people who do want republic. There are other people who do want to return to a monarchy. And in that, you have Napoleon. And we'll talk about his rise to power. So Napoleon's life, right, is one that you would not necessarily anticipate him to become ultimately the Emperor of France. However, it's really through luck, good connections, quite frankly, just brilliance, military brilliance, that Napoleon winds up getting himself into the leadership of France and ultimately becoming the emperor. So let us then talk about Napoleon Bonaparte's life. So Napoleon was born in Corsica in 1769. And as a Corsican, so Corsica is this tiny little island off the coast of Italy. Corsica was, for a good portion of its history, a subsidiary of the Italian peninsula. So Napoleon's first language was actually Italian. And when he ultimately goes to a military academy in France, he is made fun of for his Corsican accent, for his sort of provincial upbringing. And he graduates from the military academy, and he gets his way into an artillery division, a colonel in the artillery division of the French Republican Army, right? By the time he graduates, the French Revolution has already begun. And he rises quickly through the ranks, right? He has a couple of really good military victories. He's also sort of a great propagandist, right? Whenever anything doesn't go his way, he has a really great knack for turning it on its head and making it sound either not that bad or outright lying and making himself sound better. Napoleon also is very lucky again for circumstance, right? During the French Revolution, there's a lot of military nobles who are forced to flee France because they're going to get killed, and there's, the revolution's going on. So Napoleon is able to sort of gain prestige and move up rank because of the vacancies at the top. So he's also very lucky in that respect. So when Napoleon comes back to France after a couple of big military campaigns in Egypt, in the Mediterranean, he outsmarts Horatio Nelson. He also gets beaten by the British Navy. So anyway, but he winds up coming back to France, and the foreign minister, or a guy named Talleyrand, right, who we'll talk about a little bit more, is looking for a person to take over the leadership. And Napoleon is it, right? He's popular because of his war victories. He's popular because of his other engagements, let's say, within France, and he winds up becoming the person that Talleyrand will ultimately tap to become the leader of the Directory and overthrow the Directory. So it's in Italy also that he makes a lot of his major victories, right? So particularly in northern Italy, where he's fighting against the Austrians, right? So there's a couple of big battles. There's a Battle of Lodi, Lodi, that is important. Right here in the center, he defeats the Italian and Austrian armies, and this again gives him more prestige. So we're going to jump now to what is known as the coup of Brumaire. So in 1799, he helps with a coup that ousts the Directory and establishes himself as the consulate. Again, he wants to portray sort of a bringing back to the ancient Roman establishment and bring back the Roman consul. It gives Napoleon pretty much complete authority to really do whatever he wants with the government. And this winds up 2 years later in 1801, he declares himself consul for life. And again, he's gaining more power, which is a conservative bent, right? This is anti-democratic 100%. There is no democracy here. He gets supreme authority. But what he also does is he does bring in some small liberal reforms, enlightened reforms. So here are some of the enlightened changes he makes, right? He creates a council of state, which gives new ways to propose laws. Now, ultimately, it has to go through or go under his nose, goes to his desk. But it's a way for there to be more more popular approach towards governing and presenting laws to him. There's a tribunate, which is a way for laws to be debated, right? Changes to be amended and things like that. But what I'm trying to show you here is even though he has sort of supreme authority, there is at least in some respects a way for laws to be debated and brought to his attention. The other major thing that he does is he tries to make some major reforms within French government. So one of the things that's passed is called the Civil Code of Law of 1804. We know it today as the Napoleonic Code. Now, the Napoleonic Code is modeled after the old Roman law system, and it's actually something that is one of the greatest legacies of the Napoleonic period. It's something that has become a staple in Germany, for instance, right? Germany, for instance, today still has a legal code system that is very rigid, very systematic, right? X happens, Y is the outcome. And again, that is based off of this. But anyway, so this is a way to assert some of the Enlightenment principles, right? Equality before the law for all men. It abolishes the estate system. It abolishes the serf system. Women are not given equal rights. In fact, women are extremely limited under this system. Women cannot have divorce, cannot petition for divorce. Women cannot earn money. They can work, but their money goes straight to their husband and then their son. Again, this is a completely anti-enlightened respect in terms of women, but there are some other respects that this becomes very enlightened. Private property becomes really important here. And again, private property had always been protected for the elites, for the aristocrats, but not so much for the underclasses. But what's being protected here is anybody who owns private property, your rights are protected. And this is really a way to start to look towards the lower classes and their acquisition of wealth. The final thing that he does is he welcomes back all of those nobles who had fled France during the revolution. And this is a brilliant tactic, right? He says you can come back, you can retake your titles, you can purchase your land, your old land, if it's been purchased by someone else. And this is a way for him to sort of get the support of the people who will ultimately give legitimacy to his rule. So it's a great strategy, and again, this is an important thing that he does. The other piece that he does is he opens up a meritocracy, right? He wants strong workers to work for the government that are talented individuals. So he establishes promotions based on merit. He's again, because aristocracy is gone, we no longer have a situation where aristocrats can curry favor. Again, for a person who rose the ranks through his own success, he wants that open to others. One of the big things is he does also is mends the relationship with the Catholic Church. You will remember from the French Revolution that one of the institutions that has taken a great hit in all of this has been the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church's land has been stripped away. The Catholic Church's land not only has been stripped away, but it also, by selling it, the French government has also used that land to create wealth and basically create its monetary system. So the Napoleonic government makes a deal with the Pope, makes peace with the Pope, but also says that the Catholic Church can freely practice its faith. However, bishops need to be appointed can be recommended by the Pope, but appointed by the consul, by himself, by Napoleon. And all religions are accepted, right? So the Catholic Church no longer has supremacy. But what this does for the Pope, right? So why does the Pope sign on to this? The Pope signs on to this because it gives him the right to have his positions back, his power back in France. So this is a big deal because it's a restriction on the government of the church. It's a restriction on the authority of the church, but it's also a way for Napoleon to exert more control. So Napoleon also makes some big economic and social reforms that are there to help, again, sort of all people. So France's economy throughout the revolution had been a mess. The assignats, which were the French currency, were worthless, right? They were being sold, if you had $100 or 100 assignats valued piece of paper, it was only being worth about 8% at some points of what its value, right? So you're talking just really useless money. So he establishes the Bank of France in 1800. What this does is this gives the peasantry an opportunity to put money in to a bank, and it gives them a sense that they have value that can be gained some interest. But it also really, gives the government the ability to take on debt. It's a way to buoy up the value of the country. And it's seen as a piece of stability. So again, it's a way to help level out a playing field. The other thing he does is he believes that education has a really important piece of the indoctrination or the enculturation of the people of France. France was a predominantly illiterate country. And what Napoleon thought was that if people could be educated, they could read the laws, they could read the civic manuals, and it was a way for them to, for the French, for the government, for the people, to expand their sort of patriotic appeal. So Napoleon starts what are called the lycées, which are basically secondary schools, high schools. And then he starts that in 1800. And then by the early 18 teens, he has also established a national university system. So again, all of these things help to secure Napoleon's popularity. And again, it's sort of this interesting balance that Napoleon runs, right? Am I going to be a liberal or conservative? I'll do some liberal reforms while I consolidate my power in a conservative fashion. One of the things that Napoleon is obviously most known for is his military acquisitions in Europe. So Napoleon, once he takes over France in 1799, he then establishes military conquest as a major goal. You'll remember, again, I mentioned this a moment ago, that Napoleon, or I should say the French, are at war with Austria-Prussia. They're at war with the British. And this is going to create a situation that when Napoleon takes over, there's just a ton of battles being fought. And by 1815, this is what, or I should say really 1812, this is what Napoleonic Europe looks like, right? His brother Joseph is in charge of Spain, which also gives them Naples. He has a sister who is in charge of Austria. Another sibling, another brother, is in charge of the Confederation of the Rhine. So that the power within Europe really rests so much with the Bonaparte family. And that really was his goal, right? Napoleon's goal was to establish a European dynastic system that would give his family control over all of the parts of Europe, sort of like the Habsburgs of the pre-1700 era. And the only problem in all that was Napoleon had not yet had a legitimate child, a legitimate heir. So he was really the only, he was the weakest link in the bunch. He will ultimately marry, he will get divorced and marry somebody else, and he will have an heir. But anyway, Napoleon's expansion was really aimed at establishing this big dynastic system. And as you can see here, there are sort of three pieces to his empire, right? There is the expanded France into areas sort of just around France. So if you go look back at this map, right, we're talking about areas. So the expanded French would be sort of here and into northern Italy. You have the satellite kingdoms, which were areas where he would place his family. So satellite kingdoms would be places like Spain, ultimately Naples. And then you have allied states, which become Austria, Prussia, and Russia. Now, the British are really the biggest enemy towards Napoleon's conquests. So he establishes the continental system. So basically, the continental system is what gets established by 1806, which basically says the British are not allowed to trade with Europe. So they can't go into German ports, they can't go into Russian ports, they can't go into Italian ports or Spanish ports. And what winds up happening, the goal here really is to try and suffocate the British out so that they will ultimately need to acquiesce and become either part of the Napoleonic kingdoms or at least acknowledge their existence. The Battle of Austerlitz, which happens in 1805, is a decisive battle which gives Napoleon the ability to do this. In that battle, he crushes the coalition forces. But Napoleon also loses a naval battle, right? So what happens at Austerlitz is he shows his success of his military while the British sort of show that they are the power on the sea. So anyway, the continental system is basically, if we go back to my map here, right, I can erase this, I suppose. Well, actually, I'll use a different color. So the continental system is basically Britain. A barrier is established blocking off the British trade with the inside of the red, right? So if I do this, right, Britain cannot trade here. The only place they can trade with is Portugal. Now this is a problem because, again, the British have the strongest navy, so this is not really going to stop them. Also, I mean, this is just, a 1,000-mile long border that you're trying to create. It's not going to be tenable to maintain it. So Napoleon does not ultimately wind up having any success with that, but it's at least a goal. All right, so we all know that Napoleon conquers so much territory during his military conquest of Europe. So what brings his defeat? And it is his attempt to invade Russia. So in 1812, Napoleon's army is sized at 614,000 soldiers. And the goal here is to march into Russia. Now, the problem with this is Napoleon's army is not all French soldiers, right? So a lot of them are Polish, a lot of them are German, a lot of them are from all of the places that he has conquered, or at least allied states. So when things start to go bad, they start to run away. So Napoleon invades Russia. Now, we often hear that it is the Russian winter that defeats Napoleon, and that's certainly a part of it. But the other part of it is the Russian government has what's called a scorched earth policy. Basically, burn everything that the Napoleonic army could use, right? So Napoleon's army was a fast-moving army. They didn't have time for supply trains to catch up with them. So what Napoleon's army would do is basically live off the land, right? Win a victory and then scavenge and take all the food and feed the army and then move to the next spot, do the same. The Russian army basically just burns everything. And the goal here is to really just starve Napoleon's army out, right? If their goal is to eat off the land, make it such that they cannot eat off the land. So the Russian army basically just retreats, starving them out. Napoleon's army is, by the time he returns to France in 1813, is down to about 40,000 troops. So Napoleon really has lost so many people to disease, to starvation, to desertion, and ultimately, this is his big blunder and where things start to go against him. Now, Talleyrand, by the time he returns to France in 1813, people are starting to turn against him. And Talleyrand, who had helped him get control of the Directory back in 1799, will flip against him and start negotiating with Tsar Alexander of Russia and Kaiser Wilhelm of Prussia. In 1814, Napoleon is basically on the defense. Prussian, Russian, and Austrian armies are attacking France from all corners. And as I said, Talleyrand is talking behind Napoleon's back. And ultimately, Napoleon is forced to surrender in 1814. He's exiled to the city of Elba, which is off the coast of Corsica in the Mediterranean. So Napoleon is, as I said, exiled to the island of Elba, which is off the coast of Corsica, and between Corsica and Italy. And he is there for a couple of months, and then he escapes to come back to France for 100 days, he flees Elba on a boat And the restored Bourbon monarchy under Louis XVIII sends soldiers to southern France to meet him and basically arrest him. And when they see Napoleon getting off the boat, they actually flip sides and say, "Welcome back, Emperor." And Napoleon has a military campaign for the next 100 days. And he is ultimately defeated in June of 1815. And this time he is exiled to St. Helena off the coast of Africa, which is too far for him to try and come back. And he dies in the early 1820s. So the Napoleonic period is one of massive importance, right? There's massive liberal changes that happen in France, but as the army expands and as the army starts to absorb Polish, German, Austrian, even Spanish soldiers, these ideas start to get into their minds. And when these soldiers return home, the ideas of the French Revolution and the French government remain with them. So that when they return home, they start to ask their own governments, well, why don't we have a public school system? Where's our national bank? Why don't we have a legal code system that will protect us and protect our property? And all of these questions start to bounce around. And when we look at the restoration of Europe and the Congress of Vienna and the conservative bent that that's going to take, you're going to see two opposing camps. A conservative, let's rewind the clock back, and a liberal, let's bring in those reforms Napoleon talks about. And those two sides are going to go head to head in 1830, in 1848, and on. Thank you.